came out, and I remember looking at my partner going, could that be true?
Police emergency 239.
Yeah, this is 7-Eleven in Garden State Park. There's an eastbound train on the Maryland Avenue train station right here. There's a guy with a gun. He just shot some people. The train's heading towards Mineola.
It's certainly a day I'll never forget.
It was a bloody 3-minute rampage, which shattered the illusion that such frightening senselessness only happens in large, dark cities. A train ride that will surely live in infamy.
The message was just incredible. We have no idea what's going on. We may have multiple dead at the Maryland Railroad Station.
Around 5:30 p.m., 18 days before Christmas, Terry Sullivan remembers he's supposed to pick up his wife's car in Mineola, and he has to make the 5:33 train to Hicksville.
I'm usually not on that line at all. I was running for the train to make it on time. As usual, I was running late, running down the stairs at Penn Station. I got into the front of the train, third car, where it was packed.
27-year-old engineer Mi-Kyung Kim is already on the train she always takes home.
She was someone who was just starting out her life. She was working at the math library at Columbia University at the time, and she had larger ambitions of going into computer animation or CGI.
Dennis McCarthy, a 52-year-old Prudential Securities administrator, arrives at the platform early, and he waits for his son Kevin, who works with him, so they could have quality time on the train. 27-year-old MTV interior designer Amy Federici had just moved to the suburbs of Long Island to start a new life. She was recently widowed just 3 months after getting married. She and traveling salesman James Goricki also board the 5:33 train to Hicksville.
That day, I went out and said goodbye to him before he would catch the train, and never knowing that was going to be the last day I ever see him again.
Marita Magtoto, a 30-year-old lawyer, was on the train by chance. She had no direct route home to Westbury, so she had to take a train to Queens and transfer at Jamaica. Strangers, all trying to get home. 80 people got into car 3 on the 5:33 train to Hicksville, including 35-year-old Colin Ferguson.
And as it would be, he got, for what his intention was, the perfect seat on the train. He was in the last row. He had with him a bag, and in the bag he had a Ruger pistol, and he had 240 rounds of ammunition available. Among the ammunition was about 30 rounds of Black Talon bullets.
As the commuter train pulled out of New Hyde Park Station and approached Maryland Avenue, passenger Colin Ferguson drew his weapon, stood up, and started shooting people at random.
It took many of them maybe 10 to 15 seconds before they even realized what was going on.
Police say a gunman pulled out a 9mm weapon and opened fire. Police say at least 17 people were hit by bullets.
There was a huge rush of people coming down the aisle towards me. Before I knew it, I was on the floor.
One of the most horrific crimes in Long Island history.
He fired initially to the seat directly opposite him.
It was an act of blind hate.
That rear section of the car on the north side is where 3 of the deceased were found.
Some passengers never made it home.
Dennis McCarthy, James Goricki, and Richard Nettleton.
Eventually I saw Colin Ferguson walking with his arm outstretched with his gun, shooting. For a moment, he looked at me and decided not to shoot me or do anything, and continued onward towards the more eastern part of that car. When he looked at me, though, I was like, I have no defense. I'm just, sitting duck here.
As he worked his way down the train with the second magazine, he shot everybody indiscriminately. I'll add here that there are 3 additional decedents that were found. One, Amy Federici, who was found right in that aisleway. We do not know exactly where she was seated or if she in fact was seated. Mi-Kyung Kim was found in one of the vestibules, and Marita Magtoto was found in the other vestibule.
I had just finished seeing a movie with a friend, and I picked up the phone and I asked my father to pick me up at the Maryland Avenue station. And my father said, "Well, you know what happened there?" And I said, "What? What are you talking about?" And so he said it again. And then I asked, "Well, where's Mi-kyung?"
It was chaos. Bloody, frightening chaos.
Many people were hit by the same bullet. People were diving between the seats. This is a packed car, so people are lying on top of each other. Other people are rushing all the way to the eastern portion of the car. But they can't get out.
In 180 seconds, Colin Ferguson altered the lives of dozens of people who were on a moving train with nowhere to run. When they finally stopped at the Maryland Avenue station, the doors wouldn't open.
This is a 12-car train, but it's only a 3-car platform at Maryland Station. So the train needs to stop at a particular spot. The train stopped prior to that. So the engineer did not open the doors, afraid that some people would step out, not be on the platform. So the doors had to be opened manually.
I had to go out through the end doors that connect the trains to each other instead of in the vestibule. And then it was just complete chaos outside.
Within 4 to 5 minutes, a dozen Nassau police ambulances had arrived at Maryland Avenue, along with 2 police helicopters, to transport the wounded to area hospitals who went into disaster code.
We flew down here. We were here in seconds, one of the first cars here. I got out of my car, and the first thing I had was a man running towards me, all full of blood. And he says, "Can you help me? Can you help me?" And I said, "All right, sir, let's calm down. Let's see what's going on. Are you hit? Are you hit?" He was not hit. He was one of the people sitting next to somebody that was.
As word of the shooting spree spread, frantic friends and relatives came looking for loved ones who might have been on the train.
A stampede broke out until the train engineer climbed out a window and opened the doors from the outside. But in the car where Colin Ferguson was, there was no escaping.
There was nowhere you can go, and you just felt trapped.
A tragedy that could have been far worse had it not been for the heroics of 3 Long Islanders who tackled the alleged gunman before he could do more harm.
One of the gentlemen saw the slide stay back on the weapon, which indicates that the weapon is empty. As he was going to turn to get another magazine to reload is when the 3 heroes jumped on him, took the weapon, and held it.
My train was delayed by about an hour. And that evening, when it finally arrived at Maryland Avenue Station, it pulled up alongside my sister's train. Her train was still there. It was still a crime scene. By that time, my father was waiting in the parking lot for me. He said that there was some unidentified Asian female at a local hospital. When I got back home, my mother was crying, and she said, "Mi-kyung got shot. Mi-kyung got shot." At that point, she still had a heartbeat. She was still alive at that point.
Mi-kyung Kim had been shot in the head, and she held on for 24 hours. But the next day, she died at the hospital.
There was nothing they could do. And then my mom said she saw my sister's vital signs just flatline. And then she died. I mean, it really was like an atomic bomb had detonated in our living room. And you're just in absolute shock, and that's what kind of kept us going for the first few months. It's just this adrenaline shock.
When we return,
thank God those 3 guys were right there, just rushing at him.
How 3 men ended the massacre on the train, and what police learned about the gunman's motive. When Crime Files continues. Crime Files continue.
On December 7th, 1993, Jamaica-born Brooklyn resident Colin Ferguson opened fire on a packed commuter train on the Long Island Railroad. For a moment, the shooting stops, and 42-year-old father of 4, Kevin Blum, runs towards Colin Ferguson. A split-second decision he later said was because it just doesn't happen like this.
You just don't leave work in the morning and get shot on a train and never make it home to say goodbye to anybody.
And right behind him was 31-year-old Michael O'Connor, a securities trader for Goldman Sachs, and 34-year-old Mark McEntee, a money market salesman for Merrill Lynch. None of these men knew each other. None of them knew what the other was going to do. All 3 men piled on top of Ferguson as he tried to reload his gun for a second time.
We just tackled him, pushed him into a seat. Kevin sat on top of him. I grabbed his right arm, and the other gentleman grabbed his left arm.
thank God those three guys were right there just rushing at him, and they were amazing to me.
They're called heroes for a reason. And they were all reluctant heroes, I might add.
I'm not a hero. It's just, a lot of the other people should be honored more than I am.
Just felt like they did what they had to do.
With Ferguson pinned, off-duty Long Island Railroad officer Andrew Roderick happened to be at the station picking up his wife who was on that train.
I did not know at the time. I just didn't even know. I just went in and tried to do the best that I possibly could.
He got onto car 3 and put Ferguson in handcuffs. By the end of his bloody rampage, Ferguson emptied 2 15-round magazines and shot 25 people, killing 6.
My husband and all those other people should have never gotten killed.
While all this was going on, Joyce Goricki is just getting home to start dinner with her 10-year-old daughter, Karen. She's waiting for her husband, James, to come home after commuting in on the 5:33 train when she sees her neighbors gathering outside.
And I said, "What's going on?" And one of my neighbors says, "Oh, there was a shooting on the railroad." And before you knew it, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anybody. And I said, "Oh, God." I was afraid to open the door, but I knew it must have been the police.
The police told her husband's final words.
He said when he was dying, "Tell my wife that I love her."
Of Colin Ferguson.
He avoided any conversation concerning the train as best he could. He did ask at one point how many people were dead. About all he would get into it.
Police found scraps of angry notes on Ferguson that suggested he had been planning the attack for weeks, and he wrote Nassau County is the venue.
The notes start the reason for this. And he lists what he calls local town Negroes who did something against him. He lists the local police departments that did something against him. The professors at Adelphi who wouldn't give him an A. He felt that he could have been anything he wanted to be, but everybody was discriminating against him.
And we were convinced that Colin Ferguson was not legally sane. And based on our understanding of his history and background, it was due in large part to his exposure to racism here in the United States of America.
Ferguson was indicted on 93 counts, including murder, attempted murder, weapons charges, and civil rights violations.
Matter is adjourned.
At a pretrial hearing, a defense psychiatrist found Ferguson to be delusional.
So while the defense was characterized as the Black Rage defense, and that, of course, made for great headlines, the fundamental defense was not guilty by reason of insanity, and that was the defense that we had planned on interposing when we went to trial.
But that didn't happen.
No! Colin Ferguson was so crazy, he believed himself to be sane.
And so did a court-appointed psychiatrist. Ferguson ultimately met the legal criteria for competency to stand trial.
Standard for competence is remarkably low. And it was at that point that Colin Ferguson obtained a bundle of rights, one of which is the right to represent himself. And he rejected the defense of insanity because, of course, that would have to have him admit that he was not sane, something he was absolutely never going to do. So he fired us.
Mr. Ferguson, are you confident you can win this trial? Absolutely.
The courtroom is packed with TV cameras every day, and all the major networks are covering this outlandish performance by Ferguson.
93 counts, only because it matches the year 1993. Had it been 1925, it would have been 25 counts.
It's even been satirized in a skit on Saturday Night Live.
This is a case of stereotype victimization of a black man and subsequent conspiracy to destroy him. Nothing more. Mr. Ferguson expects the evidence to show that he did not fire a gun.
But the reality was 10 days of compelling testimony as one passenger after another identified Ferguson as the man who shot them.
He looked me dead in the eye and pointed the gun, and with the most serious look I have ever seen on anyone's face, he shot me in the chest.
At the time Maria McToda was shot, what did you do?
Just looked down in disbelief, turned to my left, and looked you right in the face.
There is not enough evidence to support intentional murder in any way, based on the testimony of numerous witnesses.
It was so crazy. I felt like Elvis could have landed in a UFO in the middle of the courtroom and I wouldn't have blinked an eye because that's how crazy it was.
He was able to act out his own delusions of grandiosity on this huge stage in front of the cameras.
Ferguson, acting as his own attorney, cross-examined the Long Island heroes who wrestled him to the ground.
And at that point, Mr. McEntee, when the police officer entered the train, did you hand a gun to him?
No, I did not. Initially, I was completely scared out of my wits. The only thoughts that were going through my mind at the time were that I was going to be shot, that this wasn't fair to my wife and to my children.
Still ahead.
When Kevin took the stand, you could hear a pin drop in the courtroom.
The most severely wounded of the survivors confronts the man who killed his father and...
Do you think 3 decades later, Colin Ferguson understands what he did that day? Colin Ferguson shot 25 people on a routine rush-hour train ride home, killing 6 innocent lives. His victims are facing him again in a courtroom, and Colin Ferguson questions them as he represents himself.
As the trial went on, he began to learn when to object and when not to object. And I remember vividly, Kevin McCarthy was going to take the stands. Kevin was the most severely wounded of the survivors. When Kevin took the stand, you could hear a pin drop in the courtroom.
When was the first time you found out about your father?
When I was still in North Shore Hospital, because I realized that he wasn't coming over with my mother.
And I could hear the attorneys behind me telling Ferguson, you have no questions of this witness. Ferguson stood up and said, I have one question.
You could just, if possible, articulate to the jury if there is any way whatsoever you can assist them in positively identifying the shooter on the train.
No, I did not see the person that shot me.
Because he was shot from the rear. It didn't make a difference. But he wanted to get his 2 cents.
It took the jury just 10 hours to find Colin Ferguson guilty. Murder in the 2nd degree. What is your verdict?
Guilty.
The victims and the families of the deceased were absolutely some of the best and nicest people I've ever met. To deal with what they went through, I couldn't be more impressed.
At his sentencing, victims' families finally have a chance to confront the gunman who took everything from them.
At that point, we were really tired of having this circus. It felt like a circus, kind of focusing on him. And finally, the cameras turned on us, and we were able to tell our stories.
That's when I hope you'll come to realize for the first time in your life that you have no one to blame but yourself for what a miserable excuse for a human being you are. You are nothing and you are entitled to nothing.
I said, and you look what you did to everybody. You killed all these people. And that's when I turned to the judge and told him, don't you ever let him out.
Don't you ever ever get a chance to destroy anybody else's life like you did to all these other people.
And in my heart, I feel this animal should suffer till the day he dies.
You don't deserve to hear the laughter that he gave us. You don't deserve to hear the strength he gave us.
Do you think 3 decades later, Colin Ferguson understands what he did that day?
I think that Colin never has been able to move beyond his own sense of victimization to get to a place where he could understand what it is he did and develop some empathy.
Do you think that is a just sentence?
The sentence putting him in jail for the rest of his life is the least we could do.
Every mass shooting is a gut punch that can happen anytime, anywhere, because our country is saturated with guns.
No matter how delusional or paranoid or schizophrenic Colin Ferguson appeared during the 6 weeks of this trial, that up until 10 minutes ago, he would have still been eligible to buy the same type of gun with that same large capacity clip to kill the 6 wonderful human beings and wound the 19 of us.
I know that my sister would have wanted my family and I to move forward with our lives and be happy. And you just have to hope that it never happens to you.